Yes, I'm sitting on the floor. Yes, I'm full of cold. Don't ask me about it, okay? My nose is probably going to run. I'm probably going to cough. I might even ejaculate. Anyone's guess. This is not my first take of this video, and I'm really trying to do it all in one take because I can't be bothered to edit it. So I'm going to try and run through really quickly. If you've got any questions, or if there's anything I don't cover in enough detail, then just drop me a comment or drop me a message, and I'll discuss it further, either in a DM or if I get enough requests, I'll do it as another video. So I'm going to try and quickly cover the honourable mentions. The list itself, it's a top 15. So there's some honourable mentions here. Just for some context, I try to buy every album that I enjoy and want to add to my collection. I try and buy it in physical media where possible. And again, where possible, I will try and get the vinyl because that is my preferred method of media consumption, in terms of music anyway. So some of these I do have, some of them I don't. Some of them I intend on getting, some of them I don't. I have only brought out the physical vinyl for the top 15. So these honourable mentions, I'm not going to be able to show any artwork because, again, I can't be bothered to edit this with fancy artwork and stuff. Not happening. So honourable mentions start with Deraps. Jacob Deraps is a guitarist and singer. He's done some Van Halen covers on YouTube, and that's how I found him. And then I must have followed him either on Spotify or on Instagram or something, and discovered that he'd done an album with his band. And they're basically a combination of Mr. Big and Van Halen. He plays like Eddie Van Halen, but sings a little like Richie Kotzen, so it's really a hybrid band. Nothing new, nothing original, quote unquote, but really exciting nevertheless. And an album that I would seek out. You can get it on vinyl. I have it on vinyl. And I would recommend doing that to support the band. So that's Deraps. The next one is it Closure Continuation, I think it is, Porcupine Tree. So it's an album that's been over a decade in the making, from what I gather. As a very, very casual Porcupine Tree fan, I had no anticipation. Therefore, I wasn't disappointed. I thought the album was really, really solid. Great album, some great songs, and some great playing all around. But it didn't floor me, and it didn't wow me as much as perhaps I wanted it to. So I guess to an extent, maybe I was disappointed. But it's definitely worth seeking out, definitely worth listening to. So that's Porcupine Tree. The next honourable mention is one that I didn't expect to be on this list in any way, shape, or form, but that is the self-titled record by the Mars Volta, and that is again, another band who have taken a very, very long hiatus, but they're back, and it's a good album. I was not impressed upon first listen, but I listened to it again, and then listened to it again, and I really enjoyed it, and I think it's a very safe album. If you're familiar with the Mars Volta's work, then you'll know that their music can sometimes be very erratic. This is a much more calmer, radio-friendly album, but nevertheless, still a very good album, and there's some really good songs on there. So that is the Mars Volta, worth checking out. Another one is Anti-Hero by Jerry Only. So Jerry Only, for those who are completely unaware, is one of the founding members of Misfits. He is their current singer and bassist, but also he now has a solo album out, and I guess a solo tour to go with it. It's a great album if you're into the Misfits, or if you're into, I guess, any kind of horror punk / rockabilly hybrid, then check out Anti-Hero. I do think it's a solid album, full of some great songs. It's a nice, snappy, half-an-hour record. The songs have some great hooks. I think production, if we're going to talk about production leaves a little bit to be desired, but still, a really, really great album as far as I'm concerned. And it's a surprise as well, to be honest. I didn't expect I didn't expect a solo Jerry Only album, but I also didn't expect it to be as good as it is. Next up is 96 Bitter Beings, which I can't remember the bloody album name right now, but 96 Bitter Beings is essentially CKY. We're just for argument's sake, it's CKY with a different name, and it's a great album. The one that they released that I can't remember the name for. Really, really solid album. It was a late entry onto this list, to be honest with you. But what can I say? I really, really enjoyed it. There's a few variants out there in terms of the vinyl, so they're worth seeking out, I'd say. Lastly, there's just three more honourable mentions. First one is Queensryche Digital Noise Alliance. I was very surprised by that album. Not a massive fan of Queensryche, never really followed their work. I think a seminal album for them is Operation Mindcrime, which I think a lot of people, especially in the vinyl and metal community, will have heard or own. It didn't really do much for me. The band don't really do much for me. I'm a Dream Theater fan, who of course were influenced. I've never said it like that before. So the camera's on. So of course it would capture me saying influenced. I'm a Dream Theater fan who were of course influenced in part by Queensryche. But I would always go more towards Dream Theater and even Fate's Warning over Queensryche. That being said, the new album Digital Noise Alliance has won me over, and I will be seeking out the last few records by Queensryche because I really, really enjoyed it. Colin Hay is another honourable mention, The Now and the Nevermore. Just a solid album from a solid singer-songwriter with a very distinctive voice. You kind of know what you're getting with a Colin Hay album. And Colin Hay has been an influence on me and part of my musical vocabulary for, 15 years, something ridiculous like that. It's basically since I was in my early teens, I was listening to Colin Hay, and that's in part because of my brother, but mainly because of Scrubs. Lastly, of the honourable mentions is Bronco by Orville Peck. This is a huge mainstream release that I did not think would be on this list in any way, shape or form, but it won me over. I really dig the style. It's very akin to old Johnny Cash and Elvis, I guess. Really, really, really like it. But and I guess for me, I couldn't look past the gimmick. If you Google Orville Peck and see what he looks like, it is a gimmick. But if you look past that, the music's really solid, and it's a very atmospheric album in a lot of ways, but a very good album nevertheless. So finally, with the honourable mentions out of the way, this is the furthest we've gotten in these takes. So everybody raise a glass because we're finally going into the top 15, and my legs haven't gone to sleep yet, so that's good. This is a late entry onto this list actually, but I couldn't not put it in the top 15. It is Of Kingdom and Crown by Machine Head. That's awful lighting. I'd say this is the best stuff they've produced since The Blackening. And no, I will not elaborate. It's a great album. It's a really great album. Next up is Rashomon by Ibaraki, which is the Matt Heafy side project, which is a black metal side project. I know that he's on some of these. Ishan is on some of these from Emperor, but I'm not sure whether he produced it. I can't remember now. But there's a really interesting podcast on the creation of this album on Spotify. I think it's called the Ibaraki Chronicles. It's 4 episodes, if I remember correctly. Really, really interesting stuff. And Matt Heafy, he's just such an interesting person in the metal community. And I think it's definitely worth not only listening to that album, but seeking out that podcast. So next up, let's put these to one side. Next at number 13 is A Beautiful Shade of Grey by James LaBrie, the lead singer, vocalist of Dream Theater. I'd personally say that this album has a better vocal performance from James than the last couple of Dream Theater records. James is always under fire from Dream Theater fans because an argument could be made that he's never been a particularly strong vocalist to begin with. And obviously over time, he's gotten worse. What I can say is that when I saw Dream Theater live in 2017, they were perfect. So I know that there are a lot of videos out there that are showing James LaBrie in an unfavourable light in terms of his vocal performances. But all I can say is that obviously there is an album from Dream Theater without James LaBrie, and it doesn't sound like Dream Theater. I don't think he's the greatest vocalist in the world, but Dream Theater wouldn't be Dream Theater without James LaBrie. That being said, I think his solo work, like I said, I think his vocal performances in his solo work is stronger because he's not trying to push and reach for these now unobtainable notes. He is singing at a much lower register naturally. And this album in particular, it's an electroacoustic album, so it's much, not necessarily slower, but it's a much calmer energy. And I think basically the singles that came out from this, Devil in Drag, Give and Take, and I think, what was the other one? Am I Right? Maybe I think that one was another single. All the singles were really great, and that was what convinced me to buy the record. No, I don't regret it. I think it's a great album. Next up at number 12, In Stasis by Monuments. I'm really doing these album covers a disservice by having this fucking light here. Excuse me. In Stasis by Monuments. UK, largely UK. I think the singer's American actually, but largely UK based gent / progressive metal outfit. This was the album that introduced me to them. I think the guitar playing is mind-blowing. There's some really, really cool technical shit that's being played. There's some brutal breakdowns, but largely it's a really beautifully melodic album from evidently a very skilled band. So that's why it's in the list. Next is, this was a really, really, this was a shoe-in straight away, and this feels like it came out centuries ago, because this year has lasted very fucking long. Rack Shack by Bloodywood. I'm probably not saying that correctly. I believe it means protector, not sure. Basically, these guys are leading the way for Bangra metal. Fantastic stuff. Like, really fucking brutal stuff at times, but beautifully melodic, similar to Monuments, I guess. And the infusion of Indian folk music or folk instruments being played, and obviously the Bangra drums, and a kind of, not reliance, but also a kind of nu metal energy, makes this a very unique album, but also kind of like a safety blanket in a lot of ways. It feels a little like a throwback to the music of the early noughties, but also, like I say, infusing a kind of modern approach in terms of the production techniques, but also, again, like the folk instruments and stuff that's being used in there. It's really, really cool, really interesting, really unique, and I'm looking forward to seeing them live next year. Next up is Jack White, Fear of the Dawn. Again, this feels like it came out a fucking century ago. But this has always been in the top 15, to be honest with you. It's a really, really great kind of riff-driven record from Jack. Not the biggest fan of Jack White or the White Stripes, but this album struck a chord with me. It's one of two. There is Entering Heaven Alive, I think it is, which is more of a softer kind of acoustic rock album that came out like a month or two after this one. But this one I prefer. Fear of the Dawn is a great album. And And like I say, very, very, very riff driven. Next is Ginger Wildheart and the Sinners, self-titled. Ginger Wildheart is an artist who I still have lots to learn from in terms of his very, very vast musical library. And I don't even mean the music that he listens to, I mean the music that he's part of. Because not only is he a very prolific singer-songwriter in his own right, he has all these different bands that are together and then they're not together and then they're together, not together. So there's lots and lots of music out there containing Ginger Wildheart that I still have to get into. But this album, which is a more country rock kind of style, Ginger's all over the place. He's done metal, he's done he has done country before actually, but it was more of a parody spoof kind of thing. But this was the first, to me at least, kind of earnest portrayal of country rock music in this outfit, The Sinners. Really, really great album, and one that has been played many times since I got it. Next up at number 8, The Dream by Alt J. This is one that was in the list again earlier in the year and hasn't moved. A really, really great album. I feel like that's the only thing I'm really saying about these records, but the Alt J are a very unusual band because, to me, they've been consistent, but to their fan base, they haven't been. And like I feel like I am a fan of Alt J, but there's this kind of divide where people really love An Awesome Wave, their first record, and then hate everything ever since. People seem to really hate Relaxer and The Dream, funnily enough. But I found The Dream to be one of their better albums. There's a few songs on here that move me, but Get Better is a real tearjerker. And it is largely fictional, that song, but because of that, and because of the words that are used in it, and the melodies actually, it's one that people can use and interpret to suit their current circumstances. So if you look at the YouTube video for Get Better, which is like an 8-bit animation for the music video, and the comments section of that is heartbreaking, but it's also really uplifting because people are finding solace in this song. Yeah, didn't expect to go off on a tangent there, to be honest with you, but The Dream by Alt J is a fantastic album. That's all I'm saying. Next up, and again, this was really, really early on the list. This came out way earlier in the year, and I don't even know if this counts as a 2022 album, but it's For Those That Wish to Exist at Abbey Road by Architects, a band I'm not massively into, but I love rock and orchestral music, and this is a fantastic record for that. It is essentially the entire album, For Those That Wish to Exist, but with a full orchestra recorded at Abbey Road Studios. It's excellent, and it's one I've listened to many, many, many times. The only caveat I will say is that the version of Animals on this record is inferior to the version that Architects recorded for Amazon Music exclusively. If somehow they could reissue this album on vinyl with that version of Animals, it would be much appreciated. Next up at number 6 is Coheed and Cambria. This is Vaxis Act 2, A Window of the Waking Mind. I really, really love this album. It is kind of a pop album when you compare it to Coheed's previous stuff, previous output, especially if you're comparing it to its predecessor, The Unheavenly Creatures. It's much more accessible than that one, but the title track, A Window of the Waking Mind, is probably their first real prog odyssey. Like, it really took me back to the kind of 60s and 70s prog stuff, like Genesis, Yes, Gentle Giant, King Crimson, that sort of stuff. There's elements of it that really made me think of that. But also, it kind of has a musical show tune, a kind of aspect to it, which I really dug. I saw Coheed live in October, I think it was, and they were fantastic. They played quite a few songs from this album. It was great, and I've loved it on every listen. It's weird. I don't feel like ever really. I don't feel now like listening to it, but I know if I put it on, I will listen to the entire thing. Now in the top five, at number 5 is Impera by Ghost. This is an album that I have the most copies of, and I don't really know why, other than it's an excellent album, and I know it's going to be high up on a friend of the page, Sam Wilkins' top list. It's going to be high up on his list as well. It's a fantastic record. Ghost are, I'd say they're a consistent band in terms of quality. However, they do not remain consistent in terms of genre. If you can even call Ghost a band, to be honest, because it is basically Tobias Forge and his minions. This is a stadium hair metal album. The opening track, Imperium, which is orchestral stuff, leads into Kaiserion, and Kaiserion opens with a falsetto scream and like dueling guitars, and it's a fantastic record, don't get me wrong, but it's cheesy as fuck. The only downside for me is 20s. I fucking hate that song. So much so that I've hidden it from Spotify when I listen to this album because I fucking hate it. Awful. Other than that, Impera by Ghost is an excellent album. This one kind of took me by surprise. It's Being Funny in a Foreign Language by the 1975. I had never listened to the 1975 properly beforehand. I didn't really see the hype. I heard their name a lot around the music scene, especially amongst vinyl collectors and stuff, but I'd never really given them the time of day. But when I listened to Happiness, or rather I saw the live performance of Happiness at Reading, they won me over, and this album is excellent. I've listened to it probably more times than anything in this stack, to be honest with you. And I don't know whether I said some of the criteria for the top 15 or top albums of the year for me is their replayability moving forward, but also how much I've listened to it since it came out. So all of these have been on repeat to an extent, which is why they're so high up on the list. So yeah, the 1975, they've won me over with this album. So who knows? Maybe I'm a fanboy now. Next up is Cowboy Tears by Oliver Tree. I don't really know what to say about this album because the guy, he is kind of a meme. He is it is a character, and it is for comedic effect, but the songs are really good, so I feel conflicted because he looks like a joke, but the music's actually really, really good. The album is a bit of a throwback. It kind of reminds me a bit of like Bare Naked Ladies. That probably isn't a fair comparison, but it reminds me of that era, of like the Pinch Me era of Bare Naked Ladies. Don't really know why. Maybe it's a production thing. Maybe it's the fact that it's, I don't know, easy. I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it. Listen to it. It's a really good album. I don't want to at all say that Bare Naked Ladies music is easy. I'm not suggesting that. I don't really know what I'm talking about. I'm full of cold. It's my excuse. Number 2, Patient Number 9, Ozzy Osbourne. It's an incredible album. I really loved Ordinary Man, which came out in 2020, believe it or not. But Patient Number 9 is obviously heavier. It's angrier. There's some great guest musicians on here, such as Zakk Wylde, Tony Iommi. Really, really, really love the album. And I do think it is better than Ordinary Man. I think Ordinary Man was a reflection on an older gentleman who is kind of coming to terms with his own mortality, and rather poetically, it came out just before the whole world went into lockdown, and people were dying. So this is a man who was facing his own mortality and coming to terms with that at such a poignant time. But then I think Patient Number 9 came out at a time where this man was angry because he had gotten past this phase of having to have surgeries and having the Parkinson's diagnosis and stuff. And now he's angry and he just wants to let off some steam. And that's what Patient Number 9 is. It probably is Ozzy's best work since... I'm going to say Black Rain. I really like Black Rain, but I know proper Ozzy fans don't. But I'd say it's the best stuff since Black Rain. At number 1, this will be no surprise to anyone who knows me personally. This is Lightwork by Devin Townsend. This year in particular, I've become a huge, huge fan of Devin Townsend. I've collected as much as I can of his work. I've listened to a shit ton of his work. And I've obviously followed Lightwork since the first single was released, and that's Moon People. Since then, I've watched the interviews, I've watched any sort of diary type things I could see online, and I've loved every moment of following the journey of this album. I think it's a really chilled out album for the most part. It's like a big hug, but there are heavier aspects in there. I kind of shunned the companion album Nightwork when it first came out, but I've listened to that as well, probably as many times as I've listened to Lightwork, and I really enjoy both of them. I don't think that they are companion pieces. Nightwork does still sound like an album of offcuts, but Lightwork is fantastic, and if you're on the fence about listening to the album, or you've never listened to Devin Townsend before, it's probably the most accessible stuff he's done. Because like many artists in this pile, Devin is a very unique person. He has fingers in many pies, and he has many spinning plates. But Lightwork is a really chilled out reflection on COVID and this whole period of lockdowns, in and out of lockdowns. And those are his words that I'm paraphrasing. He could have done an angry album, but instead he chose to channel the rage and the frustration into something that could help other people. And I think it will. I think there's therapeutic aspects to this album that I've certainly taken away from it. Call of the Void is certainly one of them, which is just a really chilled out anthem. Hopefully that wasn't too tedious for you. I've enjoyed talking about these albums. I'm sorry if I didn't go into detail talking about them. I'm sorry that I didn't pull out any of the actual records themselves, but if you want to see anything in more detail, if you want to hear any thoughts in more detail, drop me a message or drop me a comment and I'll accommodate where possible. I'm going to go and have a pint of Baileys and blow my nose for an hour. And hey, look at that, I didn't ejaculate. Well done.